I mentioned earlier about us getting closer to Easter. I realized as we were getting closer to Easter, we're getting closer to another deadline, the tax deadline in April 15th? And so that made me a little sad because I got a lot of work to do. And this week I started printing off all my documents and all this kind of stuff to try to prepare things. And I feel a little bit better about the situation. But I don't know about you. It's not something that I particularly enjoy, trying to figure out how much money I have to pay and how much money I should have paid or whatever the case may be, and getting all the documents together. Tax season is especially fun for pastors because the way that pastors get paid, you would think there's something like wrong about it because it doesn't make any sense to anybody. Just to be honest with you. And so like when we go to prepare our taxes, there's hardly any tax professionals that know anything about clergy taxes, and you get things mixed up and messed up. For example, doesn't matter, but I get a W-2 like most employees, but then I get to pay self-employment taxes. So if you're self-employed, you know what that's like. And so I get the W-2 and get to pay self-employment taxes on top of that, which means that I don't get like Schedule C business deductions, so I just get it all the way around. It's so much fun, and so much fun trying to figure all of that out. But the thing that I realized as I was doing this, as I was getting things prepared, and I'm thankful that I've got an accountant now who knows what to do, and he's also my brother-in-law, so it kind of works out that I'm able to pass documents around, so and able to pay him in like some different ways. But anyways, and so I was thinking about this, and as Hope and I were getting our documents together this week, shuffling through papers, and besides just kind of being a little grumpy, having to deal with all of this, it really caused me to reflect and just kind of think about, what was my relationship with money like? What was my relationship with money like this past year? How did my life change, or how was my life and my values impacted about money, and how does that impact my spiritual life? Today we're continuing to talk and look at life, especially looking at the spiritual life. And what we're doing over these past few weeks as we're in weeks leading up to Easter is we're looking at some specific practices that can help you take a next step in your faith, that can help you grow in your relationship with Jesus, or maybe just take a next step towards Jesus. So whether you're here today and you've been walking with God for a long time, or maybe you're just kind of exploring walking with God and what that might mean, I want to encourage you that today is about looking at another one of these practices. For the past 2 weeks, we've looked at two different practices. We've talked about worship, and we talked about listening to God through studying the Bible. And today we're going to consider our third practice, which is giving and your relationship with money. And you might be thinking, what does money have to do with spiritual things, right? Because money is one of those things, you might have some money in your wallet, or you might have some credit cards in your wallet, and you're thinking, this is the farthest thing from what leads me to God. Money causes stress or whatever the case may be. This is not something that helps me grow closer to God. But here's the thing about money and your relationship with money, is that your relationship with money will either sabotage your spiritual growth, or it can help deepen your spiritual growth. And my hope for you today is that you will consider how your relationship with money can in fact deepen your faith, and then how you can take a next step in spiritual growth. And so to help kind of paint a picture of what this looks like, with money either helping your spiritual growth or kind of sabotaging it, I want to give you two examples. And both of these examples come from the Bible. And last week, if you were here, we talked about studying the Bible. We looked at what the Bible was, and I challenged you to read a little bit of the Bible, maybe just to read 5 verses of the Bible every day, and to kind of see what God is speaking to you. So the Bible is our book of faith, and it's divided into two main sections: the New Testament that tells us about the life and the ministry of Jesus and how to live with faith in Jesus, and then the Old Testament, which tells us about God's relationship with the ancient Israelites and speaks some wisdom, and also there's a lot of poetry and stuff in there as well. And what I want to share with you today comes from the Old Testament part of the Bible, from a book called Ecclesiastes. And I'll have to warn you, if you've ever read the book of Ecclesiastes or pick it up, it's kind of an odd book. There's some odd things in this book, and there's some parts of the Bible that are kind of odd, but tradition tells us that Ecclesiastes was written by this guy named King Solomon. And King Solomon was a king in ancient Israel, and he was David's son. So if you ever heard about David and Goliath, that's a famous story people talk about. Solomon is David's son, and he becomes king. But not only does he become king, Solomon is like he's seen as a very rich and wealthy king. He builds the temple, and so this is somebody that has really assumed and gotten a lot of wealth. And in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, Solomon it starts to talk about all the ways that he has acquired things, all the many things that he's acquired. Let me just share with you. And as I'm sharing these, the things that Solomon says, these are things that might make people feel a little jealous, okay? This is like, people might start feeling a little jealous. He says, I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I also had great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and of the provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and delights of the flesh and many concubines. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from me. I kept my heart from no pleasure. Whatever my eyes desired, I was able to get, Solomon says. Nothing I kept for myself. If my heart fancied it, or if I desired it, or if I wanted it, I was able to acquire it, and I did acquire it. Now this is a statement of someone who has bought everything they have ever wanted. This is a statement of someone who has fulfilled every desire that they have ever had to desire. Money was no object for this guy. He was able to get anything and everything that he ever desired. We live in a world where we talk about, where it tells us what to value all the time, and the things that our world tells us to value revolve around this type of thing, revolve around getting things, acquiring things. It revolves around an abundance of stuff or an abundance of experiences, whether it's a newer car, a newer iPhone, a faster computer, a nicer home, the newest water bottle, or whatever that has to be carried around. Stanley. But Stanleys now are adopted by like all the moms and the high school kids. So they're probably on the way out. So they're probably on the way out. They're probably not cool anymore. So there's probably another water bottle that you need to like fill the landfill with, but it's reusable. So I guess it's better than plastic. I don't know. But anyways, whatever the case may be, we have this idea that whether it's acquiring things or going on fancy vacations or going on a vacation at all, that you just need this one more thing. And if I just had this one more thing or this one extra hour of sleep or whatever the case may be, I might finally be happy in life. I might finally get it together. And by these standards, King Solomon should have been the most happy, right? King Solomon should have had it all. He had all the possessions that he needed. He should have felt great about himself. He should have been able to live life to the fullest. But here's the thing, and this is something that you probably are aware of, but if you read through the book of Ecclesiastes, time after time again, he remarks about how it's all meaningless, how it's all pointless, how it's all vanity. And one of the things, that he speaks about is that it's like chasing after the wind, just chasing after the wind, how it's all leaving him empty. empty and meaningless. You know, society tells you that more will make you happy or new will make you happy. And I know that there is definitely pleasure when you receive that new thing or you go on that vacation. There's nothing wrong with taking pleasure in that, but the pleasure really rubs off very soon. And usually what happens is that it begins to fade away, and then it will turn into stress. Like stress, you have to now insure these new possessions that you have, or try to hold on to them, or stress that you're not going to be able to do it again, or stress that you might lose it, or something might happen. So here we have this first example of the life with the relationship to money comes from King Solomon, who acquired everything in life, but yet felt life was meaningless. And the next example that I think the Bible gives us comes from Jesus. And Jesus at this time, he's teaching people how to behave as God's children. And there's a lot involved with this. It's just trying to help people live a good life, help people behave as God's children, act as the children of God that they are. And Luke tells us that Jesus has something to say about people's relationship with money. He says this: "Give, and it will be given to you. A good portion, packed down, firmly shaken, and overflowing will fall into your lap. The portion you give will determine the portion you receive in return." So Jesus here is talking about giving as a posture not of just taking and receiving, but as a posture of giving. The message of Solomon is that life was a life spent of getting and acquiring more stuff, but yet that more stuff leaves you feeling empty. But then Jesus steps up and Jesus says something different. Jesus says, give, and you will receive. Give, and you receive in fullness. And here's the thing about giving that Jesus is talking about. Jesus here, I don't think Jesus is suggesting if you give $100, you're going to get back, $200 or $300 in return. I don't think that that's what's going on here. It's never worked out that way for me. Like, if it's worked out that way for you, that's great. But every time that I give, I can feel good about it, but I don't start getting a whole bunch of money in return. Instead, what I think Jesus is trying to get across here is there's something about giving. There is something about giving that blesses the giver. Something about giving that blesses the giver. It brings joy and purpose and meaning to life. Giving brings you a sense of joy and fulfillment in life. And one of the greatest memories that I have about this was at a previous church that I was at. It was in a small town. And they had this Christmas program. We ran this Christmas program where we invite kids to come to the church from our community. And most of these children their families struggled financially. And so the kids would come to the church, and we had a free store set up with all these Christmas gifts. And the kids would then go pick out Christmas gifts. But here's the kicker. The gifts were not for the kids, right? There were other ministries in town and other groups in town that were providing Christmas gifts for the kids. But these kids were there to pick out gifts for their families, pick out gifts for their parents or their siblings. And then we helped wrap the gifts and get them together. But what was so neat about this is that the kids took so much joy in being able to pick out a gift for their parents. The kids took so much joy in trying to find that perfect gift for their sibling, the one that they were just fighting with in the next room. But they wanted to share their love, and they felt so much joy and so much honor by being able to provide a gift to share, because giving blesses the giver. Giving blesses the giver. And the reality is, this is who God created you to be. God, you are not just an accident. Christians believe that people are not accidents. Instead, Christians believe that you were created in the very image of God. That God, when God came about the business of creating people, God was like, what's the best thing? How can we create these new beings? And God was like, I want them made in my image. And that means a whole lot of different things, but one of the things that I know that it means is that when you are created in the image of God, God is this insanely generous being. And all throughout the Bible, we read stories of God's generosity and how God blesses humanity. And so God is generous and created humanity to be generous too, because you are created in the image of God. I love what another pastor I was reading says about this. He says, when we are generous, we walk closely with God. When we are generous, we walk closely with God. Our generosity touches the heart of God, and we become what God made us to be. When we're generous, we become what God made us to be. Living with generosity, giving is a key spiritual practice in growing closer to God. Giving, just like worship and studying the Bible, is so important when it comes to growing in your spiritual life. Now, in addition to helping you grow spiritually, of course, generosity is something that can help you live a happier life because God made you that way. Generosity increases happiness. One well-known study from 2008, what they did is they gave, I think it was college students, they gave some students some amount of money. It wasn't a great sum of money, but like $5 or $20. And they said, I want you, as we give you this money, to record your happiness throughout the day. And so the group was randomly assigned. So half the group was sent to spend the money on themselves, to go buy coffee, to do something for themselves. The second group was told, your job is to spend this money on somebody else. And then they were supposed to come back and report their happiness by the end of the day. And what they found is that those who spent the money on someone else, they reported happier moods. They reported that they, in fact, were happier than those who spent this on themselves. And there have been more studies that have gone into this, and some involving like brain scanning, where it was looked at the reward centers of people's brains lights up when they give to other people, especially even when they give to charity. So there's a cause that's good, and somebody gives to charity, and the reward centers of your brain light up. And this is even more so, they found, when people have a choice as to how much they can give. And so all of this is good, right? All of this is good to talk about. All of this is good to think about. But here's the deal. You can't just think about it. You can't just talk about it. You have to practice. You have to practice and to live generosity. So what does this mean for you? What does this mean for you? Well, if you're serious about spiritual growth, it means that you need to be serious about celebrating generosity. And as I am talking, you might find yourself thinking, yeah, this is right. Yeah, I'm glad that the Will's talking about this. Yeah, this is right. You know, if you're thinking this way, you know, you realize that, yeah, you know, giving does create joy, and giving does help my spiritual life, and I'm really glad we're talking about this today. And maybe if that's what you're thinking right now and feeling right now, maybe that is a sign that you're living life as God intended you to live. Maybe that's a sign that you're living right now as the generous person that God created you to be. And if so, I give thanks for that. I give thanks that you're listening to God and walking in step with these spiritual practices that God has for you. On the other hand, if you find yourself struggling a little bit right now and not so sure about what I'm saying, I want to encourage you to think about, why is that bothering you, and how you can take the next step in your spiritual growth as it relates to generosity. So regardless of however you're feeling right now about giving in the spiritual life, I want to talk about two different ways of giving and how they can both help you grow in your faith. And the first way of giving that I want to share about is just creating generous moments in your life, creating generous rhythms in your daily life. Because God created you to be a generous person. And so that doesn't mean that I'm up here trying to coerce people to give to the church or to give to our ministry. Like, that's not the main reason that God invites you to be a generous person. God invites you to be a generous person because it's who God created you to be. And so maybe what you could begin thinking about and taking a next step is thinking about, how could I incorporate generosity into my daily life? And I'll have to tell you that my wife, Hope, she is much better at this than I am. She is, like, by nature a generous person. I oftentimes don't even think about how to be generous in life, and that's not intentional. It's just like, it doesn't cross my mind when I see some need or something happens. The first thing that I react to isn't like, okay, well, what can I do to be generous here? It's just, I don't know, I'm dense, I guess. But my wife is not. She is an incredibly generous person with her time and with finances. And one of the things that I think that we could all do, that we could do, is to begin thinking about, how could I live and add some generous moments into my month? You know, maybe think about adding 5 special acts of generosity into to your month. 5 special acts of generosity. And maybe this could be leaving a larger tip than normal at a restaurant that you're dining at. Maybe it could mean blessing someone with a gift that had been on your mind and you want to bless them with a gift. Maybe it means going out of your way to pick up donuts for someone who's struggling and having a hard time. When you pick up donuts for people, like it's a small thing, but people get really excited about donuts. They do. The people get excited about donuts, especially from Donut Palace. And so I'm not paid to say that, but those donuts are amazing, okay? Like, oh my gosh. If you don't know Donut Palace, you should. It's on the Oak Ridge Turnpike, right? Is that the Turnpike? Anyways, they're good, really good. My kids love to go there before school sometimes when we go there and get donuts. But anyways, so I'm going to stop talking about donuts because that's like, I'm just going to, okay, moving on. Or maybe there's other things you could do. Maybe you see the bloodmobile parked at Kroger and you're like, you know what, I've got a couple extra minutes today and I think I could give blood today. And that can be a generous act. Or maybe it means making a donation to a cause in your community that you know is a really important cause. And you're like, I don't have a lot of money, but you know, I've got some that I could share to be a part of the solution that's going on here to help people. And these types of patterns of giving dispersed throughout your life can create blessings throughout your life. They can create patterns of blessing. They can help you make a difference in the world and to help you take a step spiritually, because you're thinking not just how to get by, but you start to begin thinking about others and how to bless other people through your acts of generosity. And sometimes this is generosity of time, and instead of going on to your next thing, you spend perhaps a little bit of extra time with somebody as an act of generosity, whatever the case that it may be. But living life generously. And the second way of giving I want to talk about is also this giving back to God. In the Old Testament, there is some guidance that God asks people to give 10%, a tithe, back to God to help the ministry of God as a way of returning blessings to God. And today I think it's important to talk about percentage giving, where you give a certain percentage of your income back to God through the ministry of the church. And 10% is a good guide. For some of you, 10% seems like incredibly high, and that's okay. So the good thing about percentage giving is you kind of start out where you are. Maybe that's 0.5%, maybe that's 1% or 2%, and then you can start looking at what God might be calling you to do as a next step from there. And also I realize that for some of you, 10% really isn't enough to give. That God wants you to be even more generous than that, and God may be calling you to give beyond 10%. And I don't want to spend too much time talking about this. We talked about this at other times, but I realize that something powerful happens. Something powerful happens when you take a step in faith and start giving to God. When you take a step in faith and perhaps start giving to God through the ministry of the church, not only do you receive the blessing that Jesus talked about, a good portion packed down, firmly shaken and overflowing, falling into your lap, not only do you receive this blessing of fullness, it also allows you to have a greater impact than you could on your own. I think about the impact that Kern Church is able to have through our partners with the Second Harvest Food Bank. Just yesterday, we were able to host our community, and because of our shared generosity together as a church and other people in our region who give through Second Harvest Food Bank, we were able to provide food for about 20 families yesterday. And since October, we've been able to provide food. This is when we started this ministry. We've been able to provide food for over, I think, 300 families, being able to help them meet the needs around their tables. And this is only possible because we give together. And because if you or I was going to try to feed 300 families, I mean, it would probably be impossible. Many of you struggle perhaps to feed your own families, and it's tight on sometimes. It would cost you thousands of dollars to try to feed 300 families, but because the people of God can come together through the church, we are able to make an outsized impact. And this is something that people of faith have been doing since the times of Jesus. I mean, if you look at hospitals, for example, Think about how many hospitals carry religious names. I mean, this is true in our nation, as you have Methodist Hospital, Baptist Hospital, and Catholic hospitals, and all these different hospitals that carry religious names. And this is also true around the world, where in many places, the very first hospitals were founded by people of faith trying to just help other people. And in our own town, Oak Ridge's hospital is named Methodist Medical Center. And after, I think the story is that after the Army ran the hospital that we had in Oak Ridge, it was turned over to the Holston Conference of the United Methodist Church. That's part of who we are as United Methodists here at Kern. And it was turned over to them to run, and they ran it, or we, I guess, ran it faithfully for many years. The bills that I get today, though, come from Covenant. So anyways, I guess it got, but Covenant is I think it probably has a religious connection too, because that's a religious name. But they send me a lot of bills, so that's I'll quit talking about that too. Anyways, but people of faith coming together to help make a difference in the lives of people. If you were with us last week, we had Vision Sunday, and you heard about our vision as a church. You heard about the things that God is calling us to do. I mentioned it just a little bit earlier about how 50% of our neighbors are struggling. That's about 40,000 folks, by the way, in about a 20-minute drive from the church. About 50% of our neighbors are struggling with connection and finding friends and loneliness. And God has given us a vision to make a difference in people's lives by being a church of people helping people belong, grow in their faith, and make a difference. And we are cultivating new ways to welcome new people. We are laying the groundwork for launching new groups in the fall that's going to help people grow in their faith and make deeper connections that are designed for people to make connections with others and to build community. These are things that guard against loneliness and help people find meaning. It involves investing in how we lead our children and our young people to help keep them safe and to grow in their faith. And this bold vision, it will help ensure that people become connected and belong and make a difference. And it's all possible through the power of God and through your generosity and my generosity together. It's possible when you and I give to support the ministry of God together. You and I are able to make an impact that not only makes you feel good, but also helps you make an eternal difference in the lives of others. So if you're someone who is invested in giving what God has led you to give, I want to say thank you. It's an honor to serve with you, and I'm so glad that God is moving in your heart and in your life. And if you also want to share that if you feel that God is leading you today to be more intentional about your giving, I want to give you the opportunity to complete a kind of like think about that and a plan of giving card. And so we talk about this in the fall often. Sometimes it's called a pledge card. Sometimes it's called just a plan of giving card. We've got some of these available. If you want to pray about how God might be intentionally calling you to give back to God through the church, we have some of these available. They're up here after service. They're green. That was the only paper we had, so it's bright lime green. If you're interested in that, I find for me it's really helpful to do that because it keeps me accountable. It keeps me accountable to knowing how God is inviting me to participate in God's ministry. But most of all, wherever you are today, I just want to invite you to take a next step. To take a next step. And I can't make that next step for you. I don't even know what the best next step for you is in your spiritual life because we are all starting in different places. So my question to you is what next step do you need to take today? What next step do you need to take today? Are you ready do you need to take a next step and think about planning giving? Are you ready to take a step and maybe set up recurring giving online? Are you ready then, or maybe you're ready to live generosity in your daily life, and instead of thinking about giving in these ways to the church, you're like, you know what, I'm ready to live generosity on a daily basis. And I think about this sometimes, but I want to be more intentional about that. So maybe you're ready to make a commitment, a next step to say, I'm going to take 5 generous acts on this month and just kind of live that and what it would be to live patterns of generosity in your life. Because here's the deal, when you are generous, you walk closely with God. Your generosity touches the heart of God, and you become more of who God created you to be. So what is your next step? And as you think about that, I want to share one last story. And this last story, it's a story about Jesus' interaction with somebody. And I'm not going to really read it. If you want to go back and read it, it comes from Luke chapter 19. So Luke was a follower of Jesus, and he wrote this story down. And what was happening is that Jesus was in this town called Jericho. It's an old ancient town in the world, and he's in this town called Jericho, and he's trying to get to Jerusalem. You got to go up to Jerusalem. It's a hard walk. But on his way, there's a bunch of crowds around Jesus, and he stops, though, at this big tree, this big sycamore tree, and he notices that there's somebody, a grown man, has climbed up in this tree. This grown man's name is Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus, he is somebody that was ruled by money. Zacchaeus is somebody, he was a tax collector. And this is not to say anything bad about IRS agents today, okay? You may think differently. But Zacchaeus was a different kind of tax collector because the way that he made money is that he overcharged people for their taxes. And it was known that Zacchaeus was especially crooked and was especially overcharging people and stealing money from them. And so what happened is that he wanted to see Jesus, but he was a little short guy, and so he couldn't see Jesus. So he climbed up in the tree. And Jesus stops, as Jesus often does, and he realizes that something is different. And so Jesus stops, and Jesus kind of looks up, and he sees Zacchaeus, and he's never met Zacchaeus before, but yet Jesus calls Zacchaeus by name, and he says, Zacchaeus, I want you to come down from that tree, and I want to eat supper with you this evening in your home. Now, they hadn't planned this ahead of time, but Jesus says, I want to eat supper at your house. To make a long story short, Zacchaeus was moved by faith, because of Jesus' concern for him. And it responded in a way that he thought to respond. The only thing that he could think to respond in this moment is he said this. He says, look, Lord, I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anyone, I will repay them 4 times as much. This is Zacchaeus' first act of faith. He's like, he knows that his relationship of money has been keeping him separated from God. He knows that his relationship with money and taking from other people has kept his spiritual life held back. And so what he says to Jesus, as Jesus invites him to take a step in spiritual growth, he says, I'm going to give half of my possessions to the poor. And when I've cheated people, those that I've cheated, I am going to repay them back 4 times as much. Jesus knew, and in that moment, Zacchaeus knew that there was a relationship, a clear connection between your relationship with money and your spiritual growth. So just like the other spiritual practices, giving leads you to grow deeper in your faith, and your giving is evidence or proof that you have grown deeper in your faith. So what next step is God inviting you to take today? What next step is God calling you to take to touch the heart of God and to grow more into the person that God has created you to be? Let's pray. God, I thank you for your examples. I thank you that when it comes to growing closer to you, that you don't leave us alone, that you give us a path, specific steps that you invite your children to take. Worshiping you, studying Scripture to learn about you, and then also living generous lives, giving back to your ministry, but more than that, just living generously with all people, sharing goodness with the people that we interact with, being responsible in our relationship with money so that we can live for other people and we can live for you. So my prayer this day is that you would help each one here to reflect on what next step you have for them, to help them to take one next step closer and deeper to you. Give this all to you in the name of Christ Jesus our Lord. Amen.